Hi everyone, thanks for joining. Today we talk about DevTools. But first, let me introduce myself. My name is Jan, and I joined the DevTools team about a year ago. And before I joined Google, I ran my own company and did web development there. So for me, this was a super interesting transition from working with DevTools to working on DevTools. But I still use DevTools to debug DevTools, and more about that later. A quick fact about me to get to know each other a little better, or at least for you to get to know me a little better. At one point, I almost ended up running my own bread factory, so quite far away from doing software development, but here I am. Back to topic. This talk will be presented to you as a 3-course menu. There is some background information on DevTools. Then I'll take you on a journey along the life of a feature in DevTools. And finally, I show you some of the things that are new in DevTools. And I try to use the word DevTools a little less from here on. Of course, I'm not the only one on the team. We are about 20 people, and we are mainly based in Munich, but there's also a satellite team in London, for example. And due to COVID, some of us are even splattered around the world. And most of you will probably already know how to open DevTools, but just in case, you can either right-click on any element in a page and select Inspect, or for those of you who prefer keyboard shortcuts, there is Command Option I or F12, depending on your operating system. By default, this will open DevTools in a dock pane on the right side. But you can also undock it and open it in a new window. And I'll give you a quick overview of the main panels that we have in DevTools now. If you went via the Inspect option, you'll see the DOM node you clicked on being selected in the Elements panel. And the Elements panel is primarily focused on diagnosing the DOM structure of the page and its styling. And as you can see in the screenshot, you can see the DOM as a whole tree and edit it on the fly. And you can also see CSS rules and the styles they apply to the selected element. But there's also a lot more to discover. The second pane is the sources panel. You can do any JavaScript debugging there and also modify the source codes. And you can even save those changes back to the file system if you want to. There's also the lesser known option to add snippets. Snippet is basically a block of JavaScript that you frequently run in the console, and it keeps track of you. So it's a convenient place to put them and to just execute them from there. There's also the network panel, and it covers everything that is related to network. You can see all the details about the requests and responses. And for WebSockets, for example, you can even see the individual messages sent over the wire. And there's also the maybe lesser known feature to simulate different network connection speeds, like, for example, fast 3G or slow 3G or even the offline behavior. And they are quite helpful to see what other people might experience the loading of the page. They might experience the loading of your page. There's, of course, the performance and the memory panel, and they both give you a deep insight into what is currently happening on your page. You can trace your executions and learn more about what is slow or what might cause delays. And we have a lot more tools to discover that help you and facilitate your developer's life. Altogether, this is what we call the DevTools frontend, and believe it or not, it's a web app. And of course, it has access to some special capabilities. And parts of our code base are very old already. DevTools originally was based on the WebKit inspector, and you can still find the WebKit inspector in Safari today. The code or the source code is older than 14 years already. So Usually, this is a good slide for a little bit of audience interaction. I'd ask you to raise your hands to see how many of you have been working on a web app that is older than 10 years, but given the remote setting, this might not work out as expected. So, and there are a bunch of Chromies here, so they already work on a quite old code base. So instead, just for context, this is a screenshot of the what the Google website looked like back in 2006. That's 14 years ago. As a web application, DevTools does have a classic index.html page. Ours, in this case, looks like this. And given the age, working on DevTools sometimes feels like doing a bit of archaeology. By the patterns different parts of the code base use, you can often see how they originate from different times. For an example, we have the callback pattern that goes to promises and then finally to async await. Yeah, so enough about the context for now. Let's dive into the life of a feature. But since we are limited on time, maybe it's best to look into the life of a small feature. Yeah, so today we look at how we implemented the color scheme emulation. As you probably know, most operating systems allow their users to set their preferred color scheme. Usually they are referred to as either dark theme or light theme, or dark mode or light mode. And of course, websites want to integrate themselves with the the preference from the user, and they can do so by detecting the CSS media feature accordingly and style the page accordingly. So imagine yourself working on a dark theme for your web app. And it would be super annoying to constantly go back and forth to change the color scheme for the whole operating system just to see what your page looks like in Chrome. So let's see how DevTools could help in this case. Our idea was we could provide a dropdown that just overrides the setting for the page you're currently working on, and your workflow would immediately be a lot faster, right? Because you already have DevTools open probably, and it would also interfere less with the rest of your system. And now you're probably wondering, okay, adding a dropdown seems straightforward, but how can I get the page to render differently based on the value that I selected? So that is a very good point. So let's talk architecture for a moment to give you a bigger picture. Since DevTools is just a normal web app, it has all the same typical parts that you might know from other web applications. I already introduced you to the front end, and you might have guessed it already. Chromium itself is our backend, but that's not the whole picture there, because technically speaking, we have several different backends that live in multiple different processes. Chromium, as you probably know, uses a multi-process architecture to increase the security and to isolate websites from each other. So DevTools has to connect to a bunch of different targets by still making sure that no information that we might be interested in leads to a different process that should not know about that. So there's the browser process, for example, taking care of things like network traffic. And another important part are the renderers. They take care of everything related to what it's pixel on the page. And the element panel is a good example of something in DevTools that takes most of its information from there. And another important backend is V8, the JavaScript engine that's used in Chromium and also Node.js. It's responsible for everything that has to do with JavaScript and WebAssembly. And every time you type something into the console or set a breakpoint or step through a program, DevTools is talking to V8. But you might be wondering, how do these different parts talk to each other? That's the job of the Chrome DevTools protocol, or CDP for short. This protocol, it defines a set of methods and events that can be sent between front and back end. And it can either use a JSON format or a binary format. And just to give you a minimal example of what the protocol looks like for given command, if you type 33 plus 9 into the console and hit enter, DevTools will send a message to V8. Hey V8, could you please evaluate this following expression? And V8, of course, will go ahead and evaluate the expression and send back the result. In this case, it's just a number with the value of 42, but it could also be any other JavaScript object or any complexity. So if you want to see which CDP commands your DevTools is sending, you can enable the protocol monitor experiment, and it will show you all the CDP messages that are sent and received by the front end. I'll show you how to enable experiments later with the presentation. Since DevTools protocol is well defined and openly published, and anybody can use it to communicate with the Chromium instance, you can, of course, replace the DevTools front end with any other library or application that speaks the protocol, and they will then be able to control the Chromium instance. One such example would be Puppeteer. Puppeteer allows you to control Chrome from a Node.js script, and our team uses it to do end-to-end testing of our own front end again in our build pipeline. But there are also many other use cases like taking screenshots of a website or extracting information from them. Of course, the front end is not the only part that you can replace. Node.js is a great example of something implementing the CDP, because it's Node.js itself runs JavaScript, so using DevTools to debug a Node.js application is straightforward. In this case, we are just disable most of the panels though, because, for example, the elements panel wouldn't be of much use in a Node.js application. Yeah, so what about our feature? We wanted to emulate dark mode, right? So with all that knowledge on our back, we should be good to go. There will be 3 different places that we have to change for our feature: the front end, the protocol, and the back end. But before we implement anything, what do we have to do? Yeah, right, we write a design doc, because a design doc collects all the important information about the project, like what are the goals, how will we be doing it, and what will be the effects on our users. And usually we always have a lot of very fruitful conversation on these design docs, and eventually they align on the best solution and will get approval. So this step is super important. This is super important for us to make sure that we're actually doing the right thing in the right way. For the dark mode emulation or color scheme emulation, you can find the design doc under this link. Okay, yeah, so we got all the necessary approvals, but now we can dive into the implementation. On the backend side, there's already code to read out the user preference on the operating system level. And I think we just need to add some code there to override it with the value provided by DevTools. The implementation in the backend is trivial. No, I'm just kidding. It's usually a lot of work, and we usually collaborate with the domain experts there. So we'll skip over this part in the presentation. The next step then would be to add something to the protocol itself. There's a big file, a big PDL file. I assume that's short for protocol definition language. And while browsing it, you will find an existing command called set emulate media. And currently it's used to switch between screen and print. So if you ever want to know what your website will look like when printed, and that would be the CDP command we could use. And since the new feature is very similar to this, we'll add it as a new parameter instead of a new command. And first, we add a new type called media feature, and that's a simple key value pair. And then we make the existing media parameter optional, and we add an additional feature parameter that is an optional array of our new type. And when a developer wants to emulate dark mode, we'll then use CDP to send the following command over the wire. Now, the only thing left to do is implement the feature in the front. We skip over the part of adding everything to the DOM and jump right into the onChange handler of the select box. So this method will be called whenever someone changes the value of the select box. At first, we have to collect all the relevant information, of course. If you remember the protocol call, we needed a media parameter and an array of key value pairs. So now that we've got them together, we'll have to send all of this to the backend. DevTools automatically generates a lot of the code base based on the protocol PDL file we modified earlier. So the emulation agent.set emulated media call, for example, is coming from there. And yay, nice, we are all done. Of course, you probably want to see what the feature looks like in real life. So I brought you a demo here. Hope this works. You can see how the website reacts to the change of the color scheme. That's because it has a change listener implemented. Otherwise, you would have to reload the websites. And it displays a quick shout out to Matthias, who actually implemented the feature. And now, as a software engineer, you're probably wondering, it would be cool if I was able to test my websites to see if the color scheme emulation works. And what would be a good way to test your website? Remember how I talked about Puppeteer and how it enables you to take screenshots of your website? That seems like the right tool for this case. So let's quickly add the color scheme emulation to the Puppeteer library first. It's mostly input validation, pretty straightforward. And at the bottom, we call the CDP method. And if you wanna use it, it would be look like something like this. And just to put it into the actual script that you might be using to test your website. This is a complete test case that navigates to the V8 block, uses Puppeteer to navigate to the V8 block, and then takes a screenshot in the light mode, and then in the dark mode, and then you could be started compared with, for example, a previously recorded screenshot, just to make sure that nothing did break. All right, so let's get to the third part of the presentation, the what's new. You probably know the what's new panel in DevTools, but those are some things that you might have missed. First of all, to always stay ahead or get access to the latest features, feel free to use a canary release and have a look at our experiments. But please be aware that they sometimes might be less stable than what you might be used to from the stable release. So that's why they are called experiments and not enabled by default. To stay with the emulation theme, let's start with the time zone emulation. As you can see, the website presents time either in the menu time or in your local time zone. And now you can select different cities or add your own, and the time zones change accordingly, and also the local time that you can see in the website. Another interesting thing is Web Vitals. You might have heard of the Web Vitals as a set of metrics that try to capture how real users experience your website. And as a developer, you will probably want to optimize your website to give a great user experience to your users. And that's why we added the Web Vitals tooling to the performance panel. You can enable it by selecting the checkbox at the top that I highlighted, and you will find more information about the different metrics that yeah, are part of the Web Vitals, and learn how to debug those. And last but not least, as I already told you, there are many super useful tools. Some of them I even didn't know about before I joined DevTools. And they are if you click on the three dots at the top right corner and then select more tools, there are many very helpful tools there that you might want to try out. And last but not least, I want to present to you the WebAuthn panel. And WebAuthn is a phishing-resistant authentication. That means that you can use hardware keys, for example, or a fingerprint reader to authenticate on a website. And the WebAuthn team reached out to us because they wanted to give more developers access to implement that feature on their website. And I think it's a great example of our close collaboration with other teams and how easy it is to contribute, because they added this panel mainly on their own with just minimal guidance from us. So that's pretty cool. And our code base recently moved from the main Chrome repository into its own repository. And it's open source, so everybody can browse it and, of course, also contribute to it. So we always love new contributions from individuals as well as other Chrome teams. And if you don't know where to start, just feel free to reach out to us. It's our Twitter handle, or yeah, you can also reach us internally. And yeah, we know that we don't always get everything right. So when you find a bug, we'd love, or if you have a feature request, of course, we'd love to hear about it. There's if you open the menu again, under help, there's a report a DevTools issue entry that you can use to file a bug for us. Yeah, all right. Thanks for your time and interest. And I think we can answer questions now. There's one question. Do you find it confusing to debug DevTools front end? Well, usually this is a very good example of what color scheme emulation is useful for. I usually have DevTools itself open in the light scheme, and then open DevTools on DevTools in the dark scheme. So it's easy to distinguish them. All right, so I think that's it with the questions. Thank you very much for your time, and bye-bye.